The shocking truth of Anthem's development failures. It is now January the 13th, 2026. Meaning yesterday, Anthem is officially dead. Is that confirmed? Can anyone try logging on? Can anyone log on right now, or server's actually gone? I did, it's gone.
This is Anthem, roughly 2 years into development. This version of Anthem, codenamed Dylan, was very different than the Anthem we would end up getting in 2019. At this point, the focus was on survival and verticality through climbing and rocket jumps. There was absolutely no flight at all. When bioware demoed this version of Anthem to higher ups at EA, they gave bioware the biggest ultimatum. The game wasn't fun, so you either add full flight or the game gets cancelled. The infamous demo that bioware gave during E3 2017 didn't actually exist. Even the developers were confused. No way this is our game. With the servers shutting down in just a couple of days from this video's upload, I figured now would be the only chance I had to cover this story. So, what happened to Anthem during its development, and why did they change the original vision for what bioware pegged as the most ambitious project they would ever make?
It's important to watch this for anyone else that wants to potentially make a game in this space, but also the things to do and not to do, right? And somewhere, I hope there's a Saudi prince who's that's in the process of buying up EA. That's like, you know what? I like Anthem too. I'm gonna put Anthem at the top of the list, right next to Beyonce at my wedding. We must fix Anthem.
To understand the genesis of Anthem, one must first understand the environment of BioWare in 2012. The studio had just concluded the Mass Effect trilogy, and despite the controversy surrounding the ending of Mass Effect 3, the studio was undeniably at the apex of the industry. They were the undisputed masters of the Western RPG, capable of weaving complex narratives with choice and consequence. It was in this atmosphere of victory that Project Dylan was born. Under the supervision of Casey Hudson, the executive producer who had shepherded Mass Effect to its glory, a small team began incubation on a new intellectual property. The mandate was very vague but ambitious. Just create something new. Something that wasn't just Star Wars or Mass Effect or Dragon Age. Something that felt distinct. The early concepts for Dylan were radically different from the mechanized power fantasy that eventually shipped. The initial vision was grounded, gritty, and focused on survival. The team envisioned a hostile alien world where humanity was not the conqueror but the prey. This version of the game was heavily influenced by the unforgiving mechanics of Dark Souls. The narrative hook for this early iteration centered on a gravitational anomaly, a Bermuda Triangle of space. This anomaly would pull passing starships down to the planet's surface, stranding their crews in a lethal, untamed wilderness. In this Bermuda Triangle concept, the player wasn't an armored superhero. They were a scavenger scraping by on a planet where everything was significantly more powerful than they were.
Yo, that's cool as shit! What happened in that narrative? This would have been done way better.
The gameplay loop focused on seeing how long one could survive in the wilds before succumbing to the elements or to the fauna. This vision was compelling, but it was also incredibly difficult to execute within the constraints of the technology available. The first major fracture in this project's foundation occurred in 2014. Casey Hudson, the visionary figurehead leading the project, departed BioWare. His exit created a massive power vacuum at the very top of the Dylan hierarchy.
Damn, dude.
In game development, the vision holder is the individual who breaks ties. When the art director wants a stylized look and the design director wants photorealism, the vision holder is who decides. When Hudson left, Dylan lost its tiebreaker. The project was left in the hands of a leadership team that, while talented, lacked the singular authority to make painful decisions.
Yep.
The result was a descent into design by committee, where ideas were debated endlessly without resolution.
Oh.
The project entered a period of drift that would last for years. Nobody was leading this project.
Started out as Project Dylan. We were just thinking for many years as we were finishing out the Mass Effect trilogy, we were just thinking about like, where should games go?
Following Hudson's departure, the game was officially titled Beyond internally. This title reflected the core content.
Chat, what happened to Casey Hudson? Where did he go? He's making the new Star Wars game? Oh, I got you. I got you. All right. Man, that sucks, dude. Yeah, you really do have to have, like, this is a classic. One of you just dropped a comment. Too many chefs in the kitchen. You really do have to have someone at the top that like keeps things aligned and keeps the North Star vision constantly. You know, like, all right, this is where we're going, this direction we're going, and that way there's not too much drift with decision making and different features to implement, all that stuff.
Leaving the safety of the fortress walls to explore the dangerous unknown beyond. However, the team struggled to define what players would actually do in the beyond. The survival elements, while thematic, proved difficult to monetize and structure into a long-term service plan. The team oscillated between conflicting design pillars. Survival versus power fantasy. Was the game about feeling vulnerable or feeling powerful? Procedural versus handcrafted. Should the world be procedurally generated to ensure infinite replayability, or handcrafted? Multiplayer versus narrative. How does one tell a chosen one story when there are 3 other chosen ones in the lobby jumping on tables during the cutscenes? The game remained in pre-production for nearly 4 years. The team built prototypes, discarded them, and built new ones. They had cool assets, creature models, environmental art, and lighting tests, but they did not have a game. There was no cohesive missions, no finalized loot systems, and no clear understanding of the moment-to-moment gameplay loop. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of the Beyond era was the studio's refusal to learn from its peers. By 2014 and 2015, the looter-shooter genre was being defined by Bungie's Destiny and Ubisoft's The Division. These games were experiencing growing pains, of course, struggling with loot drops, endgame content, and story integration. But they were solving the exact problems BioWare is facing. However, internal reports suggest that mentioning Destiny was taboo within BioWare. Leadership insisted that Anthem was not Destiny.
Oh, Lord, man. Yep, I remember hearing about this. Anthem had begun naturally picking up ideas and mechanics from looter shooters like Division, Destiny, although even mentioning the word Destiny was taboo at BioWare. Diablo 3 was the preferred reference point. A few people who worked on the game said they tried making comparisons to Destiny would elicit negative reactions from the studio leadership. We were told quite definitively, this isn't Destiny, said one developer. But it kind of is. What you're describing is beginning to go into that realm. Oh, man, dude, there's just no, like, you got to remove the ego. And I'm gonna be honest, man, this applies to every studio. For instance, Arc Raiders is kicking ass, man. That game is like, I mean, I was already gonna say multiplayer game of this past year going into this next year, and it's continuing to climb. Now listen, you can have an ego about it, and you can be like, no, this isn't Arc Raiders. We're gonna do it our way, and our way is the right way. And I'm not necessarily against that. If you really got something that's a vision that's set aside from what other extraction shooters are accomplishing, but you have to analyze what Arc Raiders got right and then implement that. Can't have an ego about it, man. Implement that shit. Destiny, same thing with Destiny Rising. Look at Destiny Rising. Yes, does it suck that NetEase seems to be killing it in every single aspect, adding features that don't exist inside of Destiny 2? It does on the surface, does it appear like NetEase has a better grasp of what Destiny players want in terms of an MMO looter shooter? And then on top of that, does it sting a little bit to know that if Destiny Rising was to launch on consoles, that it would potentially erode, if not kill, Destiny 2? Yeah, I'm sure that stings a bit. Or you can look at it and go, all right, let's be real with ourselves. What did Destiny Rising get right? All right, let's implement those things.
Comparisons were discouraged. If a designer suggested a feature that sounded too much like Destiny, it was often shot down. The arrogance prevented the team from analyzing Destiny's failures. Instead of standing on the shoulders of giants, BioWare chose to stand in their own shadow, blindfolded. They were doomed to repeat the same mistakes: lack of content, poor loot scaling, repetitive missions that Bungie had already made and fixed years prior. While the creative team struggled with the identity, the technical team was fighting a losing war against their own tools. Another big pillar that led to the failures of Anthem was actually one of the biggest blunders EA has ever made as a publisher. The Frostbite engine was developed by DICE for the Battlefield series originally. It's a spectacular engine for rendering photorealistic environments, destruction, and first-person shooting mechanics. However, EA executives mandated that all internal studios use Frostbite to standardize technology and eliminate third-party licensing fees for those used in Unreal Engine or Unity. For BioWare, a studio specializing in third-person RPGs, Frostbite was a nightmare. The engine lacked basic features required for role-playing games. Frostbite didn't natively support the complex save states of an RPG. There was no backend for tracking thousands of loot items with randomized stats, and the branching dialogue trees BioWare was famous for had to be built from scratch.
So wait. What was the Mass Effect series on? What was the engine for that? It was on Unreal? God dog it. So you essentially told a studio that had been operating in Unreal to not just make a whole new game, an entirely new IP, but to also do it on a completely different engine? Fuck. That's terrible. That trilogy though was on Unreal. Andromeda was on Frostbite. BioWare worked on a lot of engines over the years, but I think the issue is that Frostbite was tailored for first-person shooters, not RPGs. Okay, I'm being told Andromeda was not Unreal though. Yeah.
The problem was exacerbated by BioWare's position in the EA hierarchy. When BioWare developers encountered a bug in Frostbite, they had to submit a ticket to the central Frostbite support team. However, that team was often busy supporting things like FIFA and Battlefield, games that generated billions in revenue. Anthem, an unproven new IP, was low on that priority list.
Oh my god.
BioWare developers would wait weeks for a fix or be forced to create hacky workarounds that destabilized the code base. And as if the internal struggles weren't enough, Anthem was developed across two geographically and culturally distinct studios: BioWare Edmonton in Canada and BioWare Austin in Texas. BioWare Edmonton was the mothership. It was the birthplace of Mass Effect and the perceived A-Team. There was a palpable sense of superiority within the Edmonton office. They viewed themselves as true artists, the visionaries. BioWare Austin, conversely, was viewed as the B-Team or support studio. Established to run Star Wars: The Old Republic, BioWare Austin specialized in online live service games. They understood server architecture, multiplayer pacing, and the economies of an MMO.
Okay, that's good.
Given that Anthem was an online live service game,
Makes sense.
Austin's expertise should have been the project's greatest asset.
Yeah.
Austin developers reportedly tried to warn Edmonton about the pitfalls they were walking into. They said that forcing heavy narrative into multiplayer missions would annoy players who just wanted to rush to the loot. Austin understood that social hubs need to be efficient, and Austin also knew that launch content would be consumed in days, and a robust endgame loop was essential. The leadership at Edmonton frequently dismissed this feedback. One developer described the relationship as Edmonton saying, "We are BioWare, we know what we're doing," while Austin was watching the train wreck happen in slow motion. But it wouldn't just be BioWare Austin throwing up red flags. Now, they had to answer to Patrick Sutherland, an executive vice president at EA. And if you've seen my Arc Raiders video, you know that Patrick is one of the most decorated executives in the history of gaming. His reach spans from Battlefield, Battlefront, the finals, and of course Arc Raiders. So, what did Patrick say when he saw the demo for Anthem? In 2017, BioWare leadership prepared a major demo for Patrick. This demo, known as the Farm Build, represented the best version of the game they had. It was a grounded, survival game, it did not feature flight. And Sutherland hated it. His feedback was brutal. He criticized the graphics, the gameplay, and the lack of a wow factor. He famously told leadership, "This is not the game you promised me." And for a studio of BioWare stature, this was a humiliating dress down. Cancellation was a real possibility. Desperate to save the project, the BioWare leadership team initiated a crunch period of several weeks. Their goal was to overhaul the demo to impress Sutherland. The team made a pivotal decision. They re-implemented Flight. Flight had been cut and re-added multiple times during development. Designers argued that it broke exploration because players would just fly over content, and level design, the world had to be built vertically. Technicians argued Frostbite couldn't stream the world fast enough for Flight, but Flight looked cool. It was the Iron Man fantasy. The team polished the graphics to an unsustainable level and tightened the flight mechanics. And when Sutherland returned to the demo, he was blown away. He loved the flight. He effectively mandated that it remained in the game.
Oh, shit.
While this decision saved the project from cancellation, it broke the game design. The entire world, built for a grounded survival game, had to be scrapped and redesigned for verticality.
I mean, either A, the game should have just been pushed to release in 2020 or some shit, or B, could a demo not have been provided earlier? I mean, like, removing flying and then adding back in, removing and adding back in really changes things. I will say this about Anthem. What if you had to conquer territories on the map that would then enable flight? So you would have had, moments there where you were grounded, but as you conquered those areas and you do whatever, then maybe like an EMP lifts and now you're able to fly. You know what I'm saying? Dude, the Edmonton studio should have worked closer with the partners. Yeah, let's continue.
To hide the fact that the engine couldn't load the world fast enough, developers had to add shapers, which were kind of like these fog walls, winding underwater tunnels, and empty space to slow the player down. Enemies designed for ground combat couldn't fight a flying player. The AI had to be reworked, but ended up being dumb firing turrets because complex tracking was way too difficult.
Yeah.
But now, BioWare had the ultimate test. Create a public reveal for Anthem, for a game that at this point simply did not exist. With Sutherland's approval secured, BioWare rushed to make a public reveal for E3 2017. The resulting demo is infamous. It depicted a seamless, dynamic living world that simply did not exist. The demo was aspirational. When the team back in Edmonton watched the E3 reveal, many were shocked. They turned to each other and asked, "Is that the game we're making? Do we have the tech for that?" The answer was no. The E3 demo was not a preview of the game in production. It was a target render that the team now had 18 months to try and replicate.
Damn.
The death march would now begin. No amount of BioWare magic would save this project. In late 2017, Mark Dara was brought in to lead Anthem alongside Dragon Age 4. His role was that of a closer. He looked at the sprawling mess of prototypes and indecisions and began cutting. He forced the team to lock down features regardless of whether they were perfect or not. A decision is better than no decision became the mantra. While Dara is credited with actually getting the game shipped, the cost was the final abandonment of the game's depth. Complex stats were simplified, survival mechanics were gutted, and the game was stripped down to a minimum viable product. Fly, shoot, loot. The periods between E3 2017 and launch was a brutal crunch. The BioWare Magic bill had come due, and the team had to build an entire game in 18 months that usually takes 4 to 5 years. The toll on the staff was catastrophic, to say the least. It became common for developers to disappear for weeks or months on stress leave. This was so prevalent that it was just an accepted
One developer said they would find a private room to cry in, that people were so angry and sad all the time. Another added that depression and anxiety are an epidemic within BioWare. Jesus Christ.
Part of the production cycle. Developers describe booking meeting rooms just to go cry in private. Veteran talent burned out by the chaos began to leave. The departure of writers like Drew Karpyshyn and designers like Steve Gilmore signaled a loss of faith in the project. Even this deep in production, the team refused to learn from Destiny. Designers who try to implement features like Destiny's loot rarity colors or UI layouts were told to change them to be distinct. This led to a UI that was objectively worse.
Yep.
Clunky, unintuitive, and obscure. Simply for the sake of being different.
Oh.
The 18 months of development would not save this project. In January 2019, BioWare launched a VIP demo to build hype, but it backfired spectacularly. Players were met with infinite loading screens, connection errors, and rubber banding. BioWare claimed that these were issues from an old build, but many persisted into launch. Upon full release in February of 2019, a new and terrifying narrative emerged. Anthem was breaking consoles. PS4 players reported that the game would crash so hard that it would shut down the console entirely, requiring a database rebuild to turn back on.
Oh my lord.
Anthem was now the game that was so bad it might even kill your PS4. By late 2019, BioWare acknowledged the failure. They announced a complete overhaul, dubbed Anthem Next, or Anthem 2.0. A small team in Austin, led by Christian Daly, began prototyping a reboot. Daly's blog posts offered hope. They showed a true return to RPG roots, adopting systems from Destiny, concept arts of new factions like the Space Pirates, and a clean, functional inventory screen. However, in early 2021, the fate of Anthem Next was decided by an EA review board. The context had changed. This was during a time when remote work had slowed down productivity due to the pandemic, and with the Mass Effect Legendary Edition succeeding and Dragon Age the Veilguard in production, EA needed to consolidate resources, and finishing Anthem 2.0 would require tripling the team size and investing millions of more dollars. So, with that being said, on February of 2021, the announcement came. Anthem Next was cancelled. The incubation team was moved onto Dragon Age, and Anthem was left to rot. Now, 5 years later...
Dude, are you telling me we got fucking Veilguard instead of Anthem 2.0? Who makes these decisions?
On January 12th, 2026, the servers for Anthem will shut down. When that switch is flipped, the game will simply vanish.
Yep.
The millions of hours of development, the crunch, the stress casualties,
it's gone
and
right now.
The Dylan aspirations, all of it will be reduced to unplayable code on a disc.
You know what blows my mind? People are actually paid to make these terrible fucking decisions. That's what people are paid lots of fucking money and equity to make terrible decisions. And then when the terrible decisions go in place, they still don't get let go.
The legacy of Anthem is a warning. It demonstrated that the BioWare name could not protect a bad game from failure, and that the Frostbite mandate crippled the studio's ability to create, and relying on BioWare's magic, aka crunch, is a sustainable strategy until it isn't.
After the disastrous launch of Dragon Age the Veilguard, BioWare Edmonton was effectively gutted, and in 2023, to help finish the Veilguard, BioWare brought in a second internal team, which was working on the next Mass Effect game. I just hope to God that whatever EA Edmonton or BioWare or whatever they're labeled as now has the proper resources to make the next Mass Effect a banger. But back to Anthem for a second.
Anthem was not killed by a single bad decision. It was killed by 1,000 small arrogances. It was the game that tried to be everything. Iron Man, Bob Dylan, not Destiny, and ended up being nothing. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next episode.
Dude, first up, fantastic video, just recapping everything. Good stuff here, Pounder. I mean, that was a really, really good video. What I will say though, man, I think the game would have done a lot better had Austin just been the lead studio instead of Edmonton. Like, literally give it to Austin, let them lead everything. Obviously, like, all the creative aspects and stuff, and Edmonton would still work alongside Austin doing that. But Austin would have been the lead to essentially make Anthem the long-term live service game that it was trying to be. Or Edmonton was being a bunch of arrogant pricks. Right. Well, that's when you would say, all right, you were Edmonton, you're now the B team. Austin, you're A team. And just go from there. You know what I mean? That requires actual leadership. Look, it sucks. It sucks. But what I will say now more than ever for any individual developer out there, dude, you can cook your own game now. You know, if you're working at a studio and you're having on a daily basis having to book a conference room to go cry in, now might be the time, brother, to just do your own thing. You know what I'm saying? I can't make that decision. That's your decision. But if it's that damn bad, you know what I mean? Anyways, I know you guys are probably tired of us talking about Anthem. This is probably it. We're probably not going to talk about it ever again. It's gone. It's dead. It's over. It's officially no longer accessible, no longer available. Anthem is gone. I hope everybody had a great time. Hope everybody enjoyed themselves. It's truly Jover.
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.